The sun had dipped below the horizon, casting eerie shadows across the small town of Ravenswood. Margaret, a woman in her 40s who loved taking evening walks, strolled along the quiet, dimly lit streets. Her footsteps echoed through the empty streets as the twilight gradually gave way to darkness. She was alone, and the only sounds were the soft rustling of leaves beneath her feet. Ravenswood was known for its daytime charm, but once night fell, it transformed into a mysterious and unsettling place, full of secrets and eerie stories. Most people in town avoided going out after dark, but Margaret had always been a curious soul, drawn to the unknown. As she walked past a row of old houses, she spotted a strange figure standing at the end of a dimly lit alley. The silhouette was tall and slender, wearing a tattered long cloak that swayed in the breeze. Margaret's heart raced, and she hesitated in her steps. She squinted to get a better look, but all she saw was the vague outline of the figure. Summoning her courage, Margaret continued her walk, convincing herself that it was probably just a trick of the fading light. The encounter had spooked her, but her love for evening walks overcame her fear. She turned onto another quiet street, and the cobblestone path was cloaked in an eerie darkness. The street was incredibly quiet, with only the faint rustling of leaves in the wind. Margaret's footsteps sounded loud in the silence, like a drumbeat in a strange rhythm. An unexplainable chill washed over her as she passed a rundown, abandoned house that had always fascinated her. The overgrown garden seemed to be hiding ancient secrets and horrors. Just as Margaret quickened her pace, she heard a soft whisper, "Margaret." She stopped in her tracks, her breath catching in her throat. The voice seemed to come from the shadows of the garden. She strained her eyes to see, but it was too dark. She spoke with a trembling voice. "Who's there?" The whisper returned, now closer, right behind her. "Margaret, don't be scared." Margaret turned around, but there was no one there. Her heart raced and her palms grew sweaty. Was she losing her mind, or was someone playing a trick on her? Gathering her courage, she continued her walk, convinced it was just her imagination. She walked deeper into the heart of Ravenswood, where the streets grew narrower and more complex. The air seemed to thicken with an unsettling malevolence, and her surroundings grew more unnerving with each step. Shadows danced on the walls of the decrepit buildings, and the silence felt heavy. Margaret's heart raced, and her mind was filled with fear. She quickened her pace, but she felt an eerie presence following her. The hairs on the back of her neck stood on end as a cold, clammy hand brushed her shoulder. She spun around, her heart pounding, but once again, there was nothing there. "Who are you?" she demanded, her voice quivering. The whisper returned, now from a different direction. "Margaret, come with me." Terrified but unable to resist, Margaret followed the chilling voice down a narrow alley. The shadows seemed to come alive, closing in around her. The air grew colder, and she shivered as she ventured deeper into the heart of darkness. As she turned a corner, she found herself in front of an ancient, derelict church. Its stone facade was covered in ivy, and the windows were shattered. The voice led her inside, growing louder and more insistent. Trembling, Margaret pushed open the heavy wooden doors. Inside, the church was even darker, the pews cloaked in shadows, and the stained glass windows depicted scenes of terror and despair. The voice beckoned her to the altar, where a sinister figure stood, cloaked in darkness. Margaret gasped in horror as the figure stepped into the dim light, revealing its ghastly features. It was a spectral, gaunt figure with hollow eyes and bony, elongated fingers. Its voice echoed in her head as it whispered, "Margaret, you belong to me now." Margaret's scream echoed through the deserted church, but no one would hear her in the cursed town of Ravenswood. The figure reached out with its skeletal hand, and the world around her dissolved into a nightmarish void. Back in town, a few brave souls who ventured out at night could hear Margaret's screams piercing through the empty streets. But they knew better than to investigate, for in Ravenswood, the terrors of the night were best left untouched. And so, the legend of Margaret's evening stroll spread through the town, serving as a grim reminder of the dangers that lurked in the darkness of Ravenswood. The townsfolk, in hushed tones, would tell the chilling story to keep their children close and to discourage anyone from going out after dark, for the spooky evening walk was a journey into madness and the abyss of fear with no way back.